back to Ladies Can We Talk with Debbie Georgatos on 660 AM The Answer.
And welcome back to Ladies Can We Talk. This is Debbie Georgatos, and as I mentioned earlier in the show, we are so excited. We have with us this evening Dinesh D'Souza. Hello, sir.
Hey, it's good to be on the show.
I'm thrilled to have you on. You know, I mentioned before you came on that this new book you have, Dinesh D'Souza is the author of a book called Stealing America, with a fabulous subtitle, What My Experience with Criminal Gangs Taught Me About Obama, Hillary, and the Democratic Party. You could kind of, that's almost like, tells a lot of the story just there. So I loved your book. Thank you. I'm so glad you wrote it, and great to have you on.
Thank you. It's probably my most autobiographical book because as a consequence of exceeding the campaign finance laws, I found myself thrown for 8 months into an overnight confinement center under the Bureau of Prisons. I was spending my nights with a group of hoodlums who had done the whole gamut of crimes. And over time, I got to learn about how these guys operate. And as I learned about their scams, what they call the pitch, the way they sell their schemes, the way they intimidate their opponents, the way they organize themselves to rip other people off, it gave me an insight into politics, and I began to realize that a good deal of politics is simply criminal activity carried on through the democratic process.
I thank you for that. Actually, when I realized going through the book how often you'd go back to recounting exchanges you had with people who were in this confinement center with you. And again, we've talked about in the past in the show that your sentence of any kind based on the very minor, relatively speaking, crime involving donations to a campaign, was obviously retaliatory, the decision to prosecute you and to have you end up in a confinement center with truly hardened criminals. And we've recounted on the show before how other people have done much worse and get nothing or a hand slap or small fine. So, what I love about this is how irrepressible you are because, in my view, the Obama administration decided they were going to teach you a lesson and actually have you sentenced to some confinement. And it seems, as you've come out, that you've been emboldened to speak up more.
Completely. I mean, this has been, to me, a learning experience. And in some ways, I looked at the confinement center as if I were an anthropologist dropped into a strange land. It's not normally a group of people I would hang with, so I thought, let me try to learn what I can. And so in some senses, it's widened my compass. It's expanded my idea of America. Now, in some ways, my love of America is undiminished, but my suspicion of the American government about the way that people use political power for their own gain, I've become more cynical about that, and I tend to see American politics less as a mere debate, a clash of ideals, if you will, and more in terms of follow the money, follow the power, try to figure out what's in it for this guy. And that is also a very illuminating way to look at politics.
It really is. I want to get into that in one moment, but I want to go back to something you talked about earlier in the book. You're on this idea that for many years, you and many people, we look at politics and political policies and we think, well, the left is proposing things that don't really work, and we on the right try to explain why big government doesn't work, why the Great Society programs aren't working, all the while thinking we're having an intellectual discussion about the merits of various policies. And all along, the left's agenda is one, and I believe the word you've used throughout your book is thievery. I'd love to have you just describe what you're talking about.
Yeah, so one of the things I learned from the criminals is that they have a term that they call the pitch. The pitch is the sales pitch that they use in order to pull off a robbery, a ripoff. So let's say, for example, a bunch of gang members want to go to the apartment of an old lady, and they want to take her furniture, her TV, and her stuff. Now, it's much easier for them to convince her to lift the latch off her door. Then they can kick in the door, walk in, and do their thing. So they have to sweet-talk her into doing that. Ma'am, we're from the insurance company. Or, ma'am, we're from the plumbing office. We're here to check out your plumbing facilities. Then she lifts the latch. Then they do their thing. So that's the pitch. And so for many years, this rhetoric that the Democrats and the progressives use about, social justice, fair share, we're trying to help the little people. And I would look at this as something to be argued with, to be analyzed, to be discussed. And so, sure, we should do that. But let's also remember that is the cunning sales pitch of a group of people who are trying to get their hands on the federal treasury. to get access to the wallets of the American taxpayer, and the result is to accumulate a great deal of power and wealth for themselves.
I really found your description of all of that so enlightening in your book. And it reminded me of something. I remember when people were first starting to say that the American left created, for example, the Great Society, not out of compassion, but out of the desire to garner a broader voting base who would never stray because they want to keep on receiving these benefits. And honestly, I'm a lawyer by background. I can be good and cynical, but when I heard that, the first time I heard those arguments, I thought, gosh, that's just such a cynical denouncement of the left. I mean, they are just misguided in their efforts to help people. I've changed my mind since then, but I saw a lot of that in your book. Just kind of let's all be more honest and real about what the left is really up to.
Yeah, and as you suggest, this is not a completely new story. I do think it's been taken to new levels by Obama and Hillary. I'm making a movie for this summer, and it's going to come out. It talks about the secret history of Hillary, but also the Democratic Party. Now, the founder of the Democratic Party was Andrew Jackson. And if we go all the way back a century and a half, we see this, the founder of the Democratic Party. And what he would do is he would violate the treaties that the federal government had made with the Native Americans. So essentially, he was figuring out ways to take Indian land by force. But here's the interesting part. Before he would do that, he would send his own private surveyors to go survey that land, and he would alert his own rich friends to go and speculate and buy that land even before he had confiscated it. So he had figured out how to convert, if you will, and I won't say domestic policy because the American Indians were then separate nations. So this was almost figuring out a way to make foreign policy into a racket that could benefit Jackson himself and his cronies. So in some ways, I guess what I'm saying is that the roots of the Clinton Foundation can be seen in the corrupt land dealings of Andrew Jackson 150 years ago.
I love it. You're actually making me laugh listening to it. I mean, in a happy way, a good way. This is just so insightful. And, really the book is it's very refreshing. I'm speaking, by the way, I want to remind if you've just tuned in, speaking with Dinesh D'Souza, author of Stealing America. Just a fabulous book. It's a substantive and in-depth, but also just an easy read. You just kind of whip right through it and you learn so very much. One thing you talked about, too, that I want to, in the book, I want to go back to just briefly is this idea that when we speak of the founding of America, we talk about the ideas in Declaration of Independence, that we have rights from God and from our Creator, and that they include the right to pursue a life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you interweave in that or introduce a concept that America also was founded in part to enable the individual to pursue wealth creation. I love that, and that the idea of government is to protect that, really. And then you go on from there to talk about entrepreneurship. But can you talk a little bit about the idea of the protection of wealth creation as an American founding concept?
Yeah, wealth creation is a very remarkable idea, that just a simple notion that wealth can be created. Historically, wealth was obtained through confiscation, essentially through theft. Machiavelli says that the borders of most nations are founded in crime, that somebody invaded somebody else, and that's how you got the borders of a particular country. But America was founded on the idea that wealth doesn't have to be stolen or appropriated. It can be created. And that if an entrepreneur creates something new, provides a new good, a new service, the iPhone, which didn't exist before, Steve Jobs isn't stealing from anyone. In fact, in some ways you can say he's even able to envision the wants and demands of consumers even before they have them. So this is wealth creation in its classic form. And America was designed to protect this kind of wealth creation. Of course, what the progressives are doing is the very opposite. They're using the confiscatory power of government to take people's hard-earned wealth and appropriate it to themselves. And by the way, this is the essence of when Abraham Lincoln had to describe slavery, he described it in the following way. He said, slavery can be summed up in one phrase: you work, I eat. So he saw slavery as the stealing of another man's labor. And so I would argue that today what we have is not obviously slavery in its classic form, but the same kind of appropriation in which people work hard to accumulate things, and then other people come, take it, and so we work and they eat.
And your book does a brilliant job of explaining how the left dupes people into thinking that what the left, are doing is saving them from some injustice by somebody else. In fact, you dedicate chapters to the idea of reparations. I learned a lot in that chapter alone. Just it is the left trying to, and especially Hillary and Obama and that niche of the left, just trying to embed in American political consciousness this idea that there's just so much injustice going on, and you've been seeing it all wrong. It's not that this guy did a great job and founded a company and did well, but he stole his wealth from you. And you talk about reparations and the idea of using greed and inequality, the constant ascribing of greed to people who are successful, and the argument that somehow it's unfair that somebody who's worked hard and been successful has more money than someone who's a day laborer. I love how you expose the tactics the left uses to get people to think they're actually doing something moral by jumping on board with the American left and their thievery.
Well, what the left has done is they've redefined the meaning of basic terms. So, for example, greed these days means wanting to keep your own money. If you want to keep your own money, they're going to accuse you of being greedy. Compassion, which used to mean feeling the suffering of somebody else, now compassion means essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul for your own political benefit, and that's called compassion. So ironically today, if you were to jump in a car and drive around, West Virginia, you will see that every fourth or fifth public building in West Virginia is named after Robert Byrd. The Robert Byrd Highway, the Robert Byrd Schools, the Robert Byrd Medical Center. Now, did Robert Byrd pay for any of that? No. Taxpayers did. Robert Byrd's achievement was essentially to appropriate the money of other people in order to build facilities on which he sticks his own name. Now, at least Trump and other people Trump may stick his name on a building, but at least it's his building. At least he paid for it. Yeah. So the scam of the progressives is to claim, in a sense, philanthropy, but it's philanthropy with somebody else's cash.
I love those examples in your book, too. We don't have a whole lot of time left, and we're speaking tonight with Dinesh D'Souza, author of the fabulous book you simply must buy called Stealing America, Buy, Read, Memorize. And the last thing I want to go to, and I wish I could talk to you for an hour about so many things that were in your book, but you do talk about, so now that we have the left's motives more clearly exposed, we actually can see that they're about thievery, they're about taking away the fruits of the labor of those who work. They're about just really turning everything on its head in terms of who's entitled to decide who keeps their own money, and the left trying to say that they are taking the high road and they're the ones who should be able to decide how wealth is distributed. But you do talk about now that we have all this uncovered, we have to do something. And you talk about recognize, publicize, get them out of the White House and the Capitol, and reaffirm America as an anti-theft society. So I'd love to have you kind of tell the listeners, so they read your book, they get these ideas, so they should go do.
Yeah, so part of what I want to say is that we all today have an influence that we often don't use. Most of us use only 5 or 10% of our actual influence. But because today, through technology, we can be in touch with a large number of people. Even if you don't write a blog or have your own website, if you have 300 friends on Facebook, remember, they have 300 friends each. And so the truth of it is that we all have an ability to reach a large number of people. Lincoln once said America is governed by public opinion. But he didn't mean the opinions of the public. He meant those people who are actively involved, hands-on, in the political process in helping to shape opinion. So my thought is to turn each of us as citizens into a sort of a multiplier of ideas. My book is one vehicle of that. I'll release a big movie this summer. Now, the truth of it is when the movie comes out, it's very important to go see it the first weekend, because if you see it the first weekend, our movie will probably open in 1,500 theaters. It'll be in 2,000 theaters the following weekend. So people, by strategically using their influence, can multiply the impact of their ideas. And that's a way to help rescue America.
We're speaking with Dinesh D'Souza. I want to thank you so much for taking time for this interview tonight. And again, his book is called Stealing America. The movie coming out this summer is called
Well, the movie may be called Hillary's America. We're just making that decision sometime soon.
I could vote for that title. And you know what I'll say as a closing? What you're saying tonight is one of the main purposes of my book, Ladies Can We Talk, of my radio show, Ladies Can We Talk, is it is the job of the individual American to speak up and stand up for what America is supposed to be, to reclaim the identity of America and know what the elements and what formed America, know what those things are, and speak up in your daily life, because I couldn't agree more. Everyone has far more political power than they realize if they will learn the arguments they want to say them well, and speak up without fear. So, Dinesh D'Souza, thank you so much for calling in, sir.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And this is Ladies Can We Talk. We're going to go off to a break.